Saludos a toda la afición de la lucha libre. Este que les habla es Michael Morales Torres, integrante del equipo de Lucha Libre Online. Y tenemos el enorme privilegio de presentarles a nuestro invitado en la noche de hoy, directamente desde Michigan para el mundo, ex WWE, ex TNA, the one-legged wonder is in the house, baby. Zach Gowen, Mr. Gowen, it is an honor, man, to have you here as our guest. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Michael. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well. I wanted to start this interview asking you, how did your passion for pro wrestling start? I mean, what wrestler, match, or rivalry was the one that engaged you enough to do this for the rest of your life?
Well, I got to say, when I was 8 years old, I lost my entire left leg to cancer in January of 1992. 2 weeks after the surgery, they allowed me to go home for the first time from the hospital. My grandmother ordered the 1992 WWF Royal Rumble for me. The greatest Royal Rumble, arguably the greatest event WWE had ever produced. And for those 3 hours, I watched the Royal Rumble and I watched Ric Flair win the WWF Championship. I didn't feel the pain of having cancer. I didn't feel the pain of looking different, feeling sick, feeling in pain all the time. All of that went away when I engaged in the magic of that event. And it was that event that really struck home and cemented my love of professional wrestling, of all things professional wrestling.
So I'm going to translate that to Spanish. Cuando tenía 8 años, Zach Gowen pierde su pierna, lamentablemente, en su batalla contra el cáncer. Se la amputan y estuvo meses en el hospital. Y su abuela, his grandma, saca o alquila el VHS de The Royal Rumble de 1992, el cual, en su opinión, es el mejor Royal Rumble de todos los tiempos. Es uno de mis favoritos, simplemente véanlo. El With a Tear on My Eye, this is the greatest moment of my life. Royal Rumble 1992. Ese evento, y por 3 horas de su tiempo, Zach Gowen no sentía dolor, Zach Gowen no se sentía diferente, Zach Gowen no se sentía mal por no tener una pierna, sino que Zach Gowen se enfocó en la lucha libre, y esa fue la noche en que todo cambió para él en cuanto a su pasión por la industria. You mentioned that before. You suffered a leg amputation due to cancer when you were 8 years old. A few years later, you made your debut in pro wrestling in 2002. You did it against your former trainer at that point, Truth Martini, who was a Ring of Honor wrestler. What struggles did you face in order to do, your first training, your first time inside a ring, your first time facing an audience? How was that experience for you of having your first match and, achieving the dream?
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask me all the time, they say, Zach, how do you wrestle on one leg? Like, how do you do it? And my answer to that is, I don't know. I've never wrestled on two. There's nothing for me to compare it to. Athletically, I was always a very good athlete, balance. The physicality part of professional wrestling training came very natural and easy to me. The struggle, the challenge that I had was trying to figure out how to get creative and to do maneuvers that other people with 2 legs can do. For example, how do you run the ropes with someone if you have 1 leg? Or how do you climb to the top rope and jump off if you have 1 leg? So I had to get creative and think about ways that I could physically do something that somebody with 2 legs doesn't have to think about.
I'm going to translate that to Spanish. Le preguntan muchas veces a Zach Gowen cómo él puede luchar sin una pierna, y él dice, pues bueno, nunca he tenido la oportunidad de luchar con las 2 piernas, así que eso para mí no es nada nuevo. Él tuvo el balance, fue atlético desde siempre, las habilidades de la lucha siempre las tuvo, y el resto fue simplemente poniéndole pasión y poniéndole corazón para poder concretar este sueño. After that, you wrestled for TNA for a while, and you shared the ring with the likes of, at that point, Ron Killings, now R-Truth, BG James, now Road Dogg, Disco Inferno, among many others. But at one point, as far as we read the reports, you received a contractual offer from Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, and you decided not to sign with them. There are 2 questions in this topic. How was your experience with, the original version of TNA, and why did you decide not to sign with them?
The original version of TNA was wild.
It was.
It was crazy. It was the Nashville Fairgrounds. Legends, of old and new stars all kind of together at once. A lot of it was really bad. It wasn't very good wrestling, but a lot of it was very, very good. For me, my goal in TNA, I never thought that WWE was even a possibility for me. Never in my life until they called me and offered me a contract. What I wanted to do was join the TNA X division with all of the smaller wrestlers that were flying all around and had a huge influence, as you know, by the Lucha Libre culture from Mexico. And I wanted to be a part of that. But once the word got out, and the idea of there being a one-legged wrestler, which I didn't think was a very big deal, but the wrestling community had never seen that before. So it was very unique, right? And so I almost went viral before there was even a viral, just by word of mouth. Like, oh, have you heard about the one-legged guy? Yeah, I heard he can jump off the top rope and do backflips. I heard he's a great wrestler. All this stuff, the rumors started spreading. And before I knew it, WWE was calling my phone, offering me a contract. And at that point, I'm like, of course the answer is yes. Like, if WWE calls anybody and offers them a contract, especially if you're a 19-year-old kid who just started wrestling, the answer is going to be yes.
So I'm going to translate that to Spanish. En aquel momento dado, Zach Gowen llega a TNA, a la versión antigua que describe como alocada y buena. Y su meta en el momento era la división X, influenciado por lo que vio en la cultura de la lucha libre, entre muchísimas otras cosas, porque en aquel momento dado para él, WWE, él pensaba que no era una posibilidad. Sin embargo, Zach Gowen se hizo viral sin haber existido el término viral, simplemente de palabra en palabra. He escuchado de este muchacho, no tiene una pierna, él puede hacer los backflips, puede hacer diferentes tipos de movidas, con una sola pierna se trepa a la tercera cuerda, y ese rumor llega a WWE. ¿Y por qué motivo Zach Gowen no firma un contrato a tiempo completo con TNA? Porque alguien lo llama y le dice, te queremos en WWE, y eso, el resto fue historia. Then you were the first one-leg competitor in the history of this version of what they know WWE, the big mecca of pro wrestling or sports entertainment. How do you felt achieving that dream? I mean, once you put the pen on the paper and it was a sure deal, how do you feel for you, for your family, for the people who have faced this kind of struggles day in and day out?
I felt overwhelmed. Listen, I got into wrestling because I love wrestling. I was so naive that I didn't, and ignorant and immature, that I didn't understand the power that my story had. It wasn't until I started getting those reactions from the WWE universe that I realized that they weren't cheering for me because I was a good wrestler. They were cheering for me because they connected with my story. And that's when I understood the power of my story. But it wasn't until later on in my WWE career, and more so after WWE, that I realized the gravity of the moment of me being the first one-legged wrestler, somebody who faced physical challenges, handicaps, barriers, obstacles, the ability to overcome them, why that was so important to the WWE fan base. And it's something that I'm most proud of. One of the things in my life that I'm most proud of is the fact that I got to be showcased on that platform and inspire millions of people.
I'm going to translate that to Spanish. ¿Cómo se sintió cuando puso ese bolígrafo encima del papel? Abrumador, fue una experiencia grande. Él no entendía, obviamente era un muchacho de 19 años, joven, buscando cumplir su sueño. Él no entendía el poder detrás de su historia hasta que llega a WWE y entiende el respaldo de la gente, tal vez no porque era el luchador más grande del mundo, sino por la experiencia que tuvo él y las vivencias que él tenía de estas discapacidades, que tal vez para muchos son discapacidades, que él utilizó como su fortaleza, y el resto es historia. Your first gig in WWE, I'm gonna curse at this one. Holy shit, Mr. America and Rowdy Piper. That was Zach Gowen's first gig in WWE. How do you felt, man, working with highly probable till this day the biggest superstar in the history of WWF, obviously besides The Rock and his success outside of the industry, but inside the industry, there was no one better than Hulk Hogan or Mr. America or whoever they want to call it, and Rowdy Piper, one of the biggest heels of all times. How do you feel working with them? How was that experience for you?
Man, it was stupid. That's how it felt. Excuse me. I was so blown away because the storyline that I presented to WWE the week before with the writers was, hey, I want to come in kind of under the radar, right? A low profile where we acknowledge the fact that I have one leg, but we don't really we don't make it a big deal. It's more about the wrestling and to replicate an angle like the 1-2-3 Kid did back in 1994 or 1993, when he lost every week and he got a little bit closer, and then one week he pinned Razor Ramon, and that was just a star is born, so to speak. That was what I understood the angle was going to be. Yet I show up to the arena and Bruce Pritchard pulls me aside and says, "Hey, listen, Zach, you're going to debut tonight. However, it's going to be with Hulk Hogan. It's going to be with Roddy Piper, and we're going to put you in an angle with Vince McMahon, the CEO of WWE." And so at that point, you just say, "Fuck it, let's do it, man." You know?
Gonna translate that to Spanish. Una semana antes, 1 week prior, Zach Gowen entrega una historia propuesta de este underdog que sí se sabía que tenía una pierna, pero no iba a ser el centro de la historia, sino que perdía y que cada vez estaba más cerca de la victoria, como 1-2-3 que era en su momento dado. Y Bruce Pritchard lo saca a un lado un viernes y le dice, ok, no un viernes, no un día de SmackDown, y le dice, ok, vas a debutar hoy. Oh, pues excelente, ¿cómo? Vas a debutar con Hulk Hogan y Roddy Piper en una historia con Vince McMahon. Y él dice como que, ok, pues fuck it, vamos a hacerlo porque no hay otro remedio. During your stay with WWF, or in WWE at that point, you wrestle Vincent Kennedy McMahon on Vengeance 2003 in a 14-plus minute match. Holy shit. Did you ever imagine that you were going to be on a pay-per-view in the co-main event against the highly probable, at that point, the most hated man in the universe, your boss, Vincent Kennedy McMahon?
No, of course not. It was never a dream or a goal. Like, you can't make this up. Yet I found myself living this life every single day, going on the road, doing press, right? Being interviewed for magazines and newspapers. And I'm talking about a feud with Vince McMahon, with Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper. It was a dream. It really felt like a dream. And looking back, I'm so beyond grateful that I'm one of the very few WWE superstars to ever wrestle Vince McMahon on pay-per-view one-on-one. There's Shawn Michaels, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, The Undertaker, Shane McMahon, and maybe a handful of others. And then there's me, Zach Gowen, which is crazy because he's a 53, at the time, he was like, 55-year-old non-wrestler. And then me, I've only been wrestling for a year. And they had enough faith in our ability to put on a good match that they put it as the co-main event, and they put a bunch of hype around it. And to me, it was incredible. And it really, honestly, it felt like a dream. You wake up in the morning and you kind of think about the dream that you had the night before, where you're like, oh, that was really, really weird. And for me, it was weird, but it was very, very real at the same time.
I'm going to translate that to Spanish. En aquel momento dado, muy pocas personas habían tenido la oportunidad de estar uno a uno junto a Vince McMahon en un pay-per-view. Tenías a The Rock, tenías a Austin, tenías tal vez a Shawn Michaels. Y de repente tenías a Zach Gowen enfrentándose uno a uno a Vincent Kennedy McMahon en Vengeance en el año 2003 en un pay-per-view. Lucha coestelar, 14 minutos de lucha, simplemente una oportunidad increíble. Y dice que en algún momento dado parecía todo un sueño. It looked like just a dream, pero no era un sueño. Era una oportunidad hecha realidad y simplemente está eternamente agradecido por eso. Let's talk about the most infamous angle probably in pro wrestling and one of the most difficult things to see. One day, randomly on a SmackDown episode, Well, but before this, you wrestled John Cena, Matt Hardy, Vince McMahon, Tajiri, Shannon Moore, a lot of wrestlers. But one day, Brock Lesnar decided to pull you down the steps or the stairs. And after that was the famous match that is still difficult to see, where Brock Lesnar dismantled Zach Gowen, and you could see people crying in the audience. It was something so difficult to see. How was working with Brock Lesnar? How was him as a partner inside the ring? I mean, physically, I cannot even describe it in words, but you can. How was that experience for you?
Well, that's the thing. One time I asked the Big Show who the strongest wrestler he'd ever been in the ring with. And without any hesitation, he said Brock Lesnar, the strongest he's ever been. And I understood that when Brock Lesnar picked me up and put me on his shoulders. It felt like I was on the back of a horse, where you feel how sturdy and powerful that horse is. That's what wrestling Brock Lesnar felt like. It was scary and it was painful. But I will give credit to Brock Lesnar. It could have been a whole lot worse, but due to how good he is and his professionalism, he kept me safe. And for that, I'm forever grateful, because he could have killed me in just a second, yet he kept me safe. And we made very memorable television. Brock Lesnar had turned heel a few weeks before, and they wanted more steam, right? He was getting babyface reactions even after turning heel, and they wanted to do something to get the crowd to boo Brock Lesnar with a little more enthusiasm. And they picked me to help him do that, you know? And so I'm grateful that I was able to create a moment that lasts forever. And I'm even more grateful that Brock Lesnar took care of me in such a great way, and we made it look way worse than it actually was.
I'm gonna translate this to Spanish. Todos recuerdan aquella historia en donde Brock Lesnar agarra a Zach Gowen y lo empuja por las escaleras y después tienen su lucha. Zach Gowen le pregunta a Big Show, oye, ¿quién es el luchador más fuerte al que te has enfrentado? Y Big Show, sin dudarlo de una sola vez, Brock Lesnar. Y de repente Brock Lesnar se vira rudo una semana antes. ¿Y cómo pueden hacer que se gane el odio del mundo? Que es lo que querían ellos, atacando a Zach Gowen. Y durante esas balizas, Zach Gowen dice que cuando lo trepa en los hombros, él sentía que era como un caballo, como un horse, por lo fuerte y sólido que era la espalda de Lesnar. Nunca había sentido algo similar, pero que Lesnar lo cuidó mucho durante todo el proceso. Lo trató de manera excelente, fue muy profesional. Y lo principal es que hicieron televisión extremadamente memorable, porque creo que a todos nosotros se nos queda eso en la mente. I also want to say something in Spanish. Instagram, pueden seguir a Zach Gowen como @ZachGowen en Instagram. Twitter, @ZachGowen, Facebook, Zach Gowen de igual manera. Y para bookings en todas las partes del mundo, Puerto Rico, México, Panamá, Argentina, Chile, every single country in the world that wants to get Zach Gowen services as a pro wrestler, solamente tienen que ir a un lugar, es www.zachgowen.com, www.zachgowen.com. Ese es el lugar para los bookings, ese es el lugar para buscarlo y contratarlo para cualquier tipo de aparición. Este caballero es la alternativa. Y por último, ustedes quieren un saludo, quieren un video, quieren un saludo de cumpleaños, un saludo para la suegra, simplemente un video de inspiración, cameo.com/ZachGowen, cameo.com/ZachGowen, y ahí pueden encontrarlo de igual manera. Zach,
thank you, Michael. Thank you, man.
No, thank you, man. Before we go, I wanted to ask, one last thing. You've been in WWE, Ring of Honor, TNA, hell, you've been everywhere. Mm-hmm. What's the most memorable and challenging experience you face in the pro wrestling industry, and what message can you send to the people? It's basically a 2-in-1. What message can you send to the people that are currently and constantly dealing with multiple struggles, physically, mentally, emotionally? Their family members and everything are highly probably an obstacle in their life, but they want to do what Zach Gowen did, and it's still doing because he's still active at this point. How can people, overcome the obstacles in life and succeed in whatever they want to do, as Zach Gowen is still doing?
It's simple, but it's not easy. And that is This is what I believe, and this is my motto, and this is how I live my life every single day, which is that life isn't about what happens to me or circumstances that I find myself in. Life is about how I respond to what happens to me or circumstances that I find myself in. And here's the caveat, here's the important part. If my responses to life are rooted in faith and in love and in service and self-care, right? We're talking diet, we're talking prayer, we're talking meditation, we're talking exercise. If my life is rooted in those four elements, my life will reflect that and be indescribably wonderful. Listen, I've had a career that I don't deserve, not only within professional wrestling, but as a youth motivational speaker, a youth engagement expert, as a DDP yoga instructor. My entire life is based on how can I help someone today without any need of recognition or reward. And if I approach my life every day like with that mindset, who can I help today? The universe helps me way more than I could ever even imagine or dream of. And that's the only way, because like you said, life is incredibly challenging and life is hard. But for me, it's all about taking care of myself and helping another individual as I go along my path.
Es fácil, discúlpame, es simple, pero no es fácil. It's simple, but it's not easy. Hay muchas cosas que hay que estar trabajando. Hay 4 elementos básicos importantes que son a cementarse, vamos a decirlo de esta manera, en la familia, en el amor, en la fe, en el servicio a la humanidad. Si trabajas de esa manera constantemente y pones tu fe constantemente en ti y también te rodeas de las personas correctas, vas a tener la oportunidad de concretar ese sueño. Trabaja fuerte por ello, como Zach Gowen lo logró. Ahora mismo él es un instructor de DDP Yoga, es un luchador, es un motivational speaker para todos los jóvenes y es una persona que está cambiando vida. Así que si él pudo, usted puede, yo puedo, todos podemos. No hay sueño grande, simplemente tenemos que trabajar por ellos más fuertes todavía y cuestión de llegar a al próximo nivel. ZachGowen.com para bookings, Zach Gowen en Instagram, Zach Gowen en Twitter, Zach Gowen en Facebook, cameo.com/ZachGowen, DDP Yoga también, pueden buscarlo, ddpyoga.com. Mr. Gowen, more than honored to have you as our guest today. Thank you for sharing your amazing story with us and always wishing you the best of luck and success in your career, in your life, and all the pathway you choose to follow.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the platform.
Thank you, sir.